Hey folks, it's Nate bringing you another Iron Age comic review, and today we are looking at the short stories compendium from Narwhal, and there's actually two books in this particular campaign, and I got both of them as you can see here, and I'm actually going to start with this one. I'll explain why in a second, but I'm going to make a separate review for the actual short story compendium that's here, and I'm going to talk about the B-sides today. And that's just because there's a lot. There's a lot of material to cover here. And I've actually only read this book so far. And I wanted to discuss it while I still had it in my brain before I read this. And I didn't want to, jumble things up or get myself confused. And this seemed like the best way to do it. I was also a little more interested in this one because it has a follow-up to Earthbound and Nosferatu in it. Or not really a follow-up to Nosferatu. More on that in a minute. But as is usual, let me break this down. It's going to be hard to break down in my usual format, but I am going to break it down that way as best I can. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. But I am going to break with convention just a bit. I'm going to talk about the Chotchkes first. I usually save these to last, but I wanted to get these out of the way so we can really dive into the thing. First of all, there's a Narwhal sticker. These have come with most of his last campaigns. It's pretty neat, but not a whole lot to say about it. We got a little trading card thing. This one is for Julia Roberts, and she is one of the protagonists of Earthbound Parts 1 and 2. So that's pretty cool. I don't know if there's more of these, like if this is the only one I got, and I have to go and find other people to, shoot with my R-type so I can steal theirs or something like that. Finally, we got an interesting little card here. It's got the Narwhal Mafia branding on it. It says the 13th sponsor, a bounder. I'm not entirely sure what that is, but on the back it says the recipient of this card is hereby deputized as a bounder in the better interest to greater glory for the 13th sponsor. Present this card to the gatekeeper at the threshold for safe passage through the ward. Report recruited contenders to Narwhal for bounty issue. So this is basically, I think, kind of a promo for Earthbound Part 3, and it probably plays into the lore of the Earthbound story in some way, shape, or form. I don't know exactly what that is, but for someone who has followed this pretty much from the beginning, it's certainly intriguing, and I look forward to seeing just how much this ties into Earthbound Part 3. I will definitely be coming back and recapping this once that project is out, maybe early next year. So hold me to that. I'll try and remember that when the book comes in. Let me talk a little bit about the comic itself. It comes in a nice square-bound format. It has pretty much identical physical construction to Narwhal's previous books. Really nice, well-finished but matte paper, so it doesn't shine too much. It's easy to look at and enjoy the art in this book, which is something I really appreciate about the kind of paper that Narwhal uses. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but I prefer it to some of these really high gloss formats that you get from other publishers or other books. I just don't think they read as well as something like this. This is still very sturdy, high quality paper. The art looks really good on it. I can't say I want for anything more. And I would certainly prefer this to something really high gloss. Let's talk not so much about the stories, but about the format. There are a total of 8 short stories in here. Technically, you could call it 7 because the first and the last are continuations of each other. But each of them is from a different creative team. Most of them are either written by Narwhal or illustrated by Narwhal or both. But there are a couple where he wasn't involved at all. And they are... I kind of flipped away from the table of contents. Probably should have stayed there. They are called... the Key Girl Bug and YK3, which is... I think a spoof on the Y2K bug. So I'm going to talk about those first, and They are very different from most of the rest of the compendium. Key Girl Bug is by a Jared K. Jewell. I'm not familiar with this person pretty much at all. Jared has a very cartoony style, not in a bad way. It's very expressive, it's very stylized, and it's kind of simple. It reminds me more of animation than it does of your traditional American comic book. Or maybe it might be closest to a comic strip. And as a visual masterpiece, this is quite fun to look at. There's a lot of things going on. There's a lot of interesting skylines. There's a lot of interesting poses. The story is basically just a series of events. There's not a character arc to it. The rising tension is a little wonky. It has a decent and comprehensible resolution and denouement, which is nice. But this is basically about a girl who, her grandpa looks like he's on a rampage here, and he's got a giant robot, but he seems a bit senile. He doesn't quite seem to understand where he is or what he's doing, so she has to get him to calm down. It's a decent story. It's certainly a lot of fun, but it's nothing to really write home about, in my personal opinion. The other story, YK3, is by... art is by Aidan McDonough, and the story is Ben Lunato. And this is an interesting kind of cyberpunk story. The art is very sketchy. There's nothing bad about it, but it's definitely going to be to taste. It's a little surreal, very modern. And it's about a guy, his AI, and his sex bot. And I know that doesn't really sound that interesting. This is a very introspective story, and the question is about whether this AI that knows everything about this guy can get him to give up his sex bot that was accidentally sent to him, whether this sex bot is a good thing or a bad thing, whether it's providing him company when he's lonely, or whether the AI can do that. These are questions that the story is not that interested in digging into. Mostly, it seems to be a trust tug-of-war between the AI and the robot over this one guy. I won't spoil who wins out, but it feels very modern. The ending is just a place where the story stops. I don't think we really get a sense of what the stakes were for this character, or where he is now that the story is over. So it was interesting. It plays with some neat ideas. The story is presented in some really striking ways. In particular, the text messages between the man and his AI are interesting, and the use of lighting is very strong in this story as well. And I am a sucker for good lighting in a story. But all in all, I would give it probably a 6 out of 10. And most of that is from its interesting ideas and presentation. So let's talk about the stories. I'm going to talk about the first and last story together at the end, but all these other stories are at least partly from Narwhal. So we have The Blood Couple, which is, or The Blood Couple, I guess, and I think I got the biggest kick out of this one, just in terms of concept. So this is kind of a follow-up from Narwhal's Nosferatu comic, and it's basically what if Nosferatu, Count Orlok, and Dracula were neighbors, and it plays around with a bunch of really funny gag ideas. Clint Stoker contributed to this, and I think in some of the setups, I see maybe a little bit of his hand based on what I've read from Downcast. If you ask me to pick out what exactly here is Narwhal and what is Clint, I couldn't tell you. So it's pretty well presented, but very entertaining. My favorite bit is when they go to the dentist together and they talk about their insurance. So very, very humorous, little attempt to be serious there. And it was a really good look at the kinds of things you can do in a really high concept story that doesn't take itself too seriously. We have Robozan. This is art and story by Narwhal, and this is a short story about people who, uh, about monkeys that live in a virtual world. That was created by humans trying to see how long it would take monkeys pounding on typewriters to write Shakespeare. And the program is designed to iterate every so often, so it deletes itself and reprograms itself. And that is shown to us as the monkeys kind of fighting a war with each other. It's interesting, it's amusing, and it ends on a cliffhanger. This is like part one. I enjoyed it. I really feel like this story needs an ending, and I know that there is another take on Robozan in this, so I'm very interested to see what that is and what it looks like. Next story is called Marbles. This is about people called switchers, and this story is very ambiguous. You don't really know what's going on in it. You get a lot of hints that they're like people like assassins, and they take each other out, and they're called switchers. And the whole story is about a switcher who's being switched, and eventually there's a hint of the supernatural because it turns out that when they assassinate someone, they turn into a pile of marbles, which have supernatural properties. And the whole point of the operation is to get the marbles. Don't lose your marbles, basically. And it's interesting. It's very high concept. You never get a clear idea of who's the good guy, who's the bad guy, what's going on, or why they're doing all this. It's all very implied and raises as many questions as it answers. Whether you like that or not is going to be a matter of personal taste. I'm not a huge fan of these super ambiguous endings. I think it works okay in this one, but it's definitely not something I want to read every day. All in all, it's not bad. One thing that is really fascinating about it is the presentation of the art. You see it has this very sketchy style. There's no gray tones here. We only use hatching to indicate light and shadow. It is presented very well. The art is by Aidan McDonough. I don't know who that is, but he or she did a really good job on this. I thought it was a fascinating visual presentation. And then, of course, the story is by Narwhal. Finally, we have Drunk Monkey, art and story by Narwhal. And this is about pretty much what it sounds like. It's a monkey who gets drunk. Here you see our, I guess, antagonist. The protagonist is this kid here on the other page. He's the owner of this monkey. And this is basically a prolonged kung fu fight. There's a drunken monkey, and the kid has to try and subdue it. First, he calls in help, and they're like, "Well, I don't know if we can subdue this monkey without killing it." So he has to get drunk himself and try and fight the monkey and get him to safety and away from things he could damage without actually killing the monkey. It's a big action set piece, and it really shows off Narwhal's art to perfection. Narwhal has always had this very loose animated style with a lot of gesture to it, a lot of feeling of motion and kinetics, and it really comes through in this. We have some really great panels of kung fu fighting and crazy acrobatics and all this other stuff. Top shelf work. Finally, we have the follow-up stories, Son of Spaceman and the Regalings of Blogart, both of which are, of course, Earthbound follow-up stories. And these both serve to kind of tell you a few things about what happened after the end of the Earthbound story. And the art is by Facundo Ezequiel. Okay, wasn't anywhere close. Facundo Ezequiel. He has a very interesting style. Narwhal has always had this bizarre mix of very realistic looking and proportioned characters and very cartoony looking characters, and Ezequiel does a great job with both of them, in my opinion. Like here's Blogart and Note, two of the more cartoony looking characters, and then here's Teresa and her son, the titular son of Spaceman in the first one. Both of these provide some hints, I think, of what we're going to be seeing in the next Earthbound book, and they tell us what some of the characters who were more on the side of the previous Earthbound book were doing in the time they were away from the story. They're a good follow-up, and I can't say that these were burning questions in my mind, but the answers are nice to have. And when we get back to the main Earthbound story, I think they really serve to whet my appetite for it. And I think I was looking forward to Earthbound 3 ever since Narwhal dropped his animated trailer, but this also, has really made me interested about what we're going to see from some of the people who are going to show back up in this story. All in all, pretty good stuff in here. Very fun, very entertaining, also very light. Nothing that you read here I think is going to be life-changing or really stick with you. Even Y3K, which is an interesting story, I don't know how much staying power it has. This is not like Foreign Agent, which I still find myself occasionally thinking about, even though it's probably been a year and a half since I read that book. Of course, these are shorts, and you could say that short stories tend not to stick with people, but all in all, I think a strong short story does stick in the memory, and I don't know if anything other than maybe some of the Blood Couple and the Drunken Monkey story will really stick with me. And I suspect that Robozan, which is an interesting premise, will probably stick with me more in this version than in this one. So, yeah, it's a fun thing, and I really like that Narwhal gave a couple of people a chance to shine with their own stories in it, but I don't honestly think that there's a whole lot there to write home about. Unless you're a completionist, I don't know if I would pick up B-sides. But the Shorts Compendium, well, we'll have more time to talk about that, but I know a couple of stories that are in here already, and they are definitely worth the price of admission, so we'll talk about that more at length later. In the meantime, let me know what you think down in the comments below. There's a like button and a subscribe button down there. You can use those as you see fit, and I'll talk to you later.